Hi, this is Pastor Phil, Third Rail Ministries. Grab yourself a cup of coffee, sit down. If at the end of this thing you like what we're talking about here, or at least are interested in following along, we invite you to subscribe. Hit the notification bell and push all when you get there, and you'll be notified when we put something up. We're trying to get about 2 a week. We thought we'd hit Tuesday and Thursday, but it seems to be depending on the day and the times. Welcome to my under construction office. The dogs are happily barking outside, and so we're going to approach the issue and the question here, the common question of why people can't or won't go to church. Probably top 5-7 reasons. 1, Pastor, if I go to that church, the walls are going to cave in. Really? If you go to any church, the walls aren't going to cave in. So that's a false statement, and here's why. The church is built to take on the sin of the world. Jesus Christ died to take on the sin of the world. The whole intention is to take on the sin of the world. So, in practical terms, your sin's not going to collapse the structural integrity unless when you walk through you blowtorch the wood. But spiritually, there's not much you can bring into the church that Jesus Christ can't handle. As a matter of fact, theologically, he already has handled it. He's just inviting you in to realize it, accept it, and invite him to be your Lord and Savior. But the answer to if I walk in, I'm going to collapse the walls because my sin is so bad that it can't handle it, that's a false statement. That doesn't add up. You just tell me you don't want to come to church. Don't come up with something that's theologically not right. 2, they're all hypocrites in there. Yep. That's true. Most of us don't want to be. Some of us are. Some of us say one thing, do another. But that's covered in Romans 7. Paul says, I don't want to do what I do, and I do what I don't want to do. What he's really talking about is you're trying to hold us accountable for the struggle that occurs, that once you realize Jesus Christ is who he is and did what he did, and that God asks us to do live a certain way, and then you watch us go out and live our daily lives. Some of us intentionally walk a double road. That's not so great, but the church was built for those people. And some of us struggle with habits and stuff that you may know more about than the church knows about, and that's kind of the reality too. We don't mean to be better than you outside of the church. That's not what we intend to do, but I'm not going to let you get the excuse of that we're hypocrites and therefore you're not going to come to the church. Because essentially everybody is. Everybody says one thing and does another. The whole point of having a church is gathering together to worship God and his son Jesus Christ in the power of the Spirit, and work at becoming less hypocritical. Work at loving God more instead of less. Work at teaching God's way and doing God's way instead of struggling with it so much. That's the whole thing. So they're all hypocrites in there. That's a true one. You're right there. Not a reason though not to come, but it is true. 3, I can talk to God just as well in the woods as in church. Well, that's partially true. In fact, that may be true for a lot of people. If you're a hunter or an outdoorsman, in some of the spectacular scenes around this country, I have no doubt you can talk to God better and more intimately sitting in some of his handicraft, his handwork than in the pews of a church. The pews of a church are kind of rowy like. There's nothing worse than the droning voice of a pastor that who's prayed 400 or 500 times over the course of ministry. And it's hard sometimes to land at church and come flying in with kids or yourself, or leave a house of busyness and come to the house of God and worship. And so you say, I'm not going to go, and I can worship God out there and I don't have to go to church. Okay, I understand that. But coming to the building, coming to the gathering, let's just call it a gathering. Most of us use a building, some use campsites. But when you gather together with Christians to worship God, it's not an act of taking, it's an act of giving. And gathering together with God's people is a good thing. So just because you can talk to God in the woods doesn't mean you shouldn't gather with his people and worship collectively. So I give you partially true on that. 4, I can see it online. In today's day and age of online ministry, especially post-COVID, that is really true. The churches had to find different ways of getting its message out, getting its worship service out when we couldn't gather together. And there was no internet during Jesus' time, so everything was done by foot and by mouth, and it has been for years. But now we have a different way of communicating the worship. Now we have a different way of communicating the business of the church. So that too is partially true. You can see it online. But the question you have to ask yourself is this: is there a benefit for me getting up, getting dressed, going to the house of the Lord, and sitting down with his people and taking the time out of my schedule to worship and praise his name with other Christians? The answer to that question is yes. As opposed to, what happens when I don't feel like getting up, going to church, don't feel like getting dressed, get a cup of coffee, roll over, and massage my guilt or my whatever by watching online instead? The key operational word there is instead. Online ministry is best used in addition to, not in place of, regular worship. And the reason for that is, like when we had COVID, we had to reach out to the people. When you're sick, we don't want you at the church when you're sick. So stay in bed, and thank goodness that the church has an online ministry that you can still take a partial part of it. But being with God's people, again, like we said in the previous one, is a real benefit. So you can see it online, that's true, but you don't get the complete benefit that you would if you came to church and worshiped with people. Okay, so the next one, 5. I can't sit where I want because of COVID. That too is true. Right now the church is reopening in general, our church is reopening in general, and we're spacing every other pew in 6-foot distance, unless, of course, you're related. That means that there's a reasonable chance that you're not going to get a shot at the place where you've always sat. But please don't let the fact that you can't sit where your family has sat in the pew for 30, 40 years is be a reason not to come to church. That's kind of ridiculous. And so you may not be able to sit where you can because of COVID. Work with us a little bit. We're trying to get the worship done and get everybody safe and hit a couple birds out of the park at one time, and we need some cooperation. So you can't sit where you want because of COVID. That is true. But again, not a reason to not come to church. Number 6, I don't have the clothes to go to church. That one has been in church as long as I've been going to church and teaching in churches. That reason to not go to church. And the answer to that isn't true or false. It's more like unknown. I don't know if you've got the clothes to go to church or not. Basically, when I think about this, there's really only one dress code. I really don't want you there naked, and I really prefer you have a shower. Some people dress up because that's their expression. They can, and they prefer to come dressed a certain way. Other people dress comfortably. I'm a fan of dress as you can. Just come. You want to come in sweats and a sweatshirt? Come. You want to come in shorts? Come. It's a little tough in the wintertime, but if you can do it, pull it off, you'll be the peak of conversation. But come. Clothes is not a reason to not attend. I think what you're really saying there is, I feel awkward because I don't seem to have the right class or it may be like a wealth thing. Please, please, please don't do that. That projects a lot of nervousness and awkwardness on your part on the church, and Jesus doesn't care. And the church is Jesus's, not the people's. All right, last one. They're always asking for money. That is true. But we're no different than anybody else. My kid is always asking for money. The gas station is asking for money. The bank is asking for money. The stores are asking for money. Everybody's asking for money. Here's the deal. The church doesn't have necessarily an income stream. We're not out there selling products. We're not out there with an oil well in our backyard. We are asking for the church, God's people, who he asked to give a tenth back to his ministry anyway, to give part of their income, which is a blessing from God, to help support the structure that people want to worship in, and also help support the staff that you have to run the structure. That's it. And then when we come up, we pull that money together. We try to be fiscally responsible. But the reason it feels like we're always asking for money is because most of the time, most everybody only gathers at Sunday worship, and that's the most efficient time to pass the plate, so to speak. However, there are some changes being made. The changes that are being made are, we're now doing phone app things in giving, and sooner or later we may move the offering plate way to the back and just not say a word about the whole thing through worship. It'd be my preference. But the church has always asked that it's be supported because it needs to be supported. And that's kind of a commitment. So it gets down to the fact that it's true. Yep, we really are. But we have the right reasons, hopefully, for asking for that money. And we want the business of the kingdom of God to keep going. So that's a quick little walkthrough of why I can or won't go to church. Please be honest. If you don't want to go to church, then you say you don't want to go to church. But there's no reason not to, unless you're not interested in the message you got, which is kind of a passive way, a little saying, I look to see you someday Sunday at our church or somewhere in a church sometime.